Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a MassMEDIC Insiders webinar series. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the president of MassMEDIC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you once again to another one of our great educational and informative sessions for the MedTech community. Today, we're going to learn how to implement and maintain an ISO 1345-2016 compliant QMS. This program is brought to you by Greenlight Guru, and our presenter today is Laura Court. She's the medical device guru at Greenlight Guru, and they're one of our really exciting members that has been with MassMEDIC for many years. I've had the pleasure to watch Greenlight Guru grow from a very small company to a very mature company, which it is today. And I've always found their content to be really exciting, and they just have a great way of presenting really critical need-to-know information in a compelling manner. A couple of housekeeping notes before I hand it over to Laura. Today's webinar is being recorded, and these slides and the recording will be available to anybody who registered for the program. Laura's gonna run through her presentation for maybe 35 to 45 minutes. In the meantime, I really encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A or the chat function in your control panel. You should see it there at the bottom of your screen. Just type in your question there and we'll monitor them, and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to go through those questions in detail. For now, though, I'm going to hand the virtual baton over to Laura to take us through this program. Laura, thanks so much for your time today, and I really look forward to hearing what you say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to get to talk to everybody. As Brian said, my name is Laura Court, and I'm a medical device guru with Greenlight Guru. I personally have had a lot of experience when it comes to new product development and medical manufacturing, but have also worked very diligently to learn everything about 13485, and have certainly had my hands in every aspect of a full product lifecycle, from the development side all the way through to the QMS implementation and post-market support and regulatory findings as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of our presentation here today. So one of the first slides that I have here open for you is just a little bit about Greenlight itself, and saying that medical device quality is truly what we do, and we're always ahead of the game. And so a little bit additional about what the industry is saying. So for startups and established medical device companies, the stakes are as high as ever. So missed commercial launch dates can equal to delaying revenue and patient outcomes. Rising costs of quality and compliance can equal impacting financial performance. Increased risk can equal patient regulatory business as well. And so that is why we're looking at that ever competitive environment that's continuing to build, especially in the last couple of years, as we're seeing a lot of new regulations come about that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes as well. So one of our founders at Greenlight Guru is John Spears. I have a wonderful quote from him up on the screen here, saying, sometimes people look at the quality system as a burden, as something they have to do. I want you to look at it in a different way. So another one of my favorite explanations from John is talking about breaking the stigma behind the word quality. So similar to his quote that's shown here, quality isn't just paperwork that you have to fill out when an adverse event happens, when you're going through the design and development phase, or something isn't right. Rather, the true purpose behind quality in a medical device is to improve the quality of people's lives. That is the true driving force behind the quality that we do in medical devices as an industry whole, and gives a different meaning behind the paperwork. So that's why we really want to strive behind breaking that stigma to that word quality. Continuing along here, we have a couple of goals that we want to go over for today. So our first goal here is to give you a phase-by-phase instruction on how to implement and maintain an FDA 21 CFR Part 820 and ISO 1345-2016 compliant QMS at your medical device company. Truly, this goal is to achieve a modern purpose-built QMS software that ensures compliance with all the latest regulations, both freeing up your engineers' time as well as reducing overall risk and your time to market, and helping you to pass the audits with flying colors. Our second goal for today here is to show you how to accelerate product development and manage risk to ensure safety throughout the total product lifecycle. So from a napkin idea to 510(k) clearance or the regulatory pathway of your choosing, straight on through to the medical release at your medical devices months to years quicker. Our third goal here today is to help you shift your company's focus from compliance only to true quality through processes that serve as a competitive differentiator. So we'll cover the most important regulations and standards that we as medical device professionals must understand and follow, from top market regulatory authorities like the FDA and ISO and the European Commission. I'll give you the knowledge and tools you need to smoothly navigate through the ebb and flow of regulatory changes, as you can be a leader in the space rather than a follower. So a couple of our big key regulatory authorities are shown up here on our slide. So we are looking at that ISO 13485. That is obviously what we are talking about today, given the title of the presentation. But then we also have the European Commission. So I know we have seen a lot of changes come about in this area over the last couple of years with the EU MDR going into effect. We also have the FDA, always changing, all the fun that comes along with regulatory changes, as well as the MDSAP. So this is kind of an interesting take where we have a lot of participating countries coming in under one auditing report for nonconformancies and shared between the United States and Canada, Japan, Australia, and Brazil. So one thing that we can always count on when looking at these kind of big key regulatory authorities here is that regulatory changes are going to be constantly happening. So we've seen that with the EU MDR going into effect, as well as over the last couple of years with COVID happening even. We saw a lot of emergency use authorizations coming into play. And so that's where you just never know kind of what's coming down the path. So we always want to make sure we're ready for those changes. So first big thing to go over here is kind of what is ISO 13485. So ISO 13485 is a harmonized standard for medical device QMS. So again, change is one thing that you can always count on as well, but 13485 does tend to be an internationally agreed upon way of implementing some of the common regulatory concepts that you see throughout multiple countries throughout the world. So one of the biggest benefits that I like to point out from this screen is our last bullet point here. So looking at the potential benefits to ISO 13485, it allows medical device organizations to obtain external recognition of conformity of a quality management system to applicable requirements or certifications. With that, when we look at that MDSAP program that we were talking about just a minute ago, we are seeing a lot more intrigue around this one audit or this grouping of countries. So that's why, as we see things that are constantly changing, ISO 13485 seems to hold more true, and we could potentially see some of those increased groupings as well. So, and we're going to have a little bit here going over what a medical device QMS overview looks like and how it's going to help you when it comes to simplifying compliance. So there are three major cornerstones to a medical device QMS strategy. You're going to see here as we go through our three, they are truly going to blend together into some common themes as well. So the first one is your right size your QMS. So your QMS should build with your company. Biggest thing to remember here is to keep it simple. Being able to make connections between your QMS and your employees' jobs is ultimately going to make it easier to follow and stay in compliance. While it could be easy to sit down and write a 3-page paragraph on how to do one simple task, if you're able to simplify it and make it easier for your employees to follow, then you're going to be looking at making it easier for them to stay in compliance and right-sizing your QMS. Our next thing here, like I just mentioned from our last one, is keeping your QMS simple. So giving some pre-thought into what your regions and applications your device is going to be used in will help you to pick the scale of your QMS. So that's why we need to look at those big regulatory authorities that we were just looking at and seeing if we can help determine what regulations they are going to require. And that's going to help us as far as how we need to set up our QMS in general. And our third one here is right sizing your QMS. So looking at options from a fully customizable system to a sort of out-of-the-box validated system with pre-built-in workflows, all of that, of course, is going to depend on the size of your company and also the knowledge base you have. So I know anyone who else has been a part of a full QMS validation system or work that's gone on, it can take quite a bit of time and effort from your employees as well. So that's why we need to look at the different systems to see what you have the time and availability to do from your team standpoint. So now I want to talk a little bit here about a risk-based QMS. Risk is definitely a common theme that we'll see throughout the entirety of your organization, from the medical device side all the way through to the business risks as well. But specifically, ISO 14971 has a good description around the processes of a risk management approach. So that applies throughout your company, from picking suppliers to the actual product itself. So I want to elaborate a little bit more talking about the risk-based QMS. Something I hear fairly often is that, oops, my apologies, things are breaking at the bottom here. So something that I hear pretty common is looking at or hearing, we're just going to rate to do risk because they don't want to be tied down with the paperwork that is involved. Instead, they want to focus on the more fun side of medical device development, which is the prototyping and the testing and kind of all of that other fun side of it, like I said. However, I think this is a view of risk that views it just as paperwork that has to be done. And again, we want to look at breaking that stigma or breaking that understanding of what risk is. So I can personally say risk is not necessarily my most favorite part of my job that I do, mainly because you spend so much time putting your heart and soul into your product. You don't want to sit down and think of all the different ways that your device is going to break and cause harm to someone. Nobody wants to do that after you work on it so diligently. However, risk is very important when it comes to the design and development phase, because it's going to help you to identify ways that it's going to fail and hurt somebody before it actually has the potential of doing that. So ultimately, it's going to help you in designing a better product that is going to be safer. And ultimately, later on down the road, that it could help save you some of that additional paperwork when we're looking at things like customer complaints and different harms and regulatory reportings that could possibly come about from our devices. So risk truly is more of a living document, and it should be included in that design and development phase to help you get ahead of some of those potential issues that could come about from your device. Our next big area here is to talk about an audit ready QMS process. So looking at some better processes. I have talked to many companies where when you mention the word audit, there is a fear that just strikes in everybody's eyes. It makes everybody scared. Nobody wants to talk about an audit. However, an audit shouldn't change what is happening in a day-to-day basis, because you should be practicing those audit-ready steps to follow your policies and procedures on a daily basis. So having a QMS that is built towards those standards and regulations and living those policies every day is going to help take away that fear and that stigma behind the audit. So if we're living by our policies, we're in compliance, we're doing internal auditing to make sure that we are following those as well, it's truly going to help take away some of that stigma when eventually one of those regulatory bodies does come knocking on your door and say, we want to audit your processes. So our next thing to talk about here is looking at the costs of poor quality. So implications of a poor QMS strategy. A 2017 McKinsey analysis revealed that the direct cost of quality is about $26 billion to $36 billion annually, representing about 6.8 to 9.4% of device industry sales. Of that total, 2/3 of direct cost of poor quality, for example, labor costs to remediate failures, as well as material and financial costs of internal and external quality failures. The other 1/3 was the direct cost of ensuring good quality. For example, organizational costs involved in preventing and appraising quality issues. So ultimately, if we can get ahead of those poor quality issues by living in an audit-ready QMS system and having good policies and practices implemented, it will in the long run save us some of that money behind the cost of the poor quality. So now we are going to look at how to implement and maintain an audit-ready QMS using the SMART methodology. So what is the SMART methodology here? So SMART is scope, make, approve, release, and track. So we are going to break down each of these 5 different areas and look at them a little bit more individually here as well. So the scope phase. First things first, you'll need to determine which regulations will apply to your device. So product classification determines the regulatory requirements you must meet in order to legally market your device. Determining your product classification will help you to better gauge the costs associated with marketing your medical device. It will also help to give you a general idea of the scope of your overall project. And your device classification will indicate how you draft your regulatory strategy and quality plan. So your plan is going to guide your product development and your design control efforts. So that is kind of what encompasses in that scope phase. It's a lot of stuff that is done at the very beginning of the initiation of both your product and your company as well. Our next phase in SMART here is the make phase. So here we're going to be looking at the foundational areas of a QMS and building the policies and procedures around those. I can say that our Greenlight system here is built around the best practices and regulations. We as well have a full template package in Guru services as well that kind of help build that foundation. So this is where we're going to start getting into those design controls, which tends to be the more fun part when it comes to building of a medical device, looking at those testing and prototypes and figuring out what our device actually needs to do. And then we get into that risk management, which I will say once more should be a part of the design controls as well, done at the same time. And then we're also going to get into the fun document control and records management, looking at change management as well. And then ultimately looking at supplier management as well, because as we're building our device, we will obviously need parts, which means we will need to approve suppliers. Our third phase here is the approve phase. So looking at preparing for those regulatory approvals and transferring to manufacturing and getting ready for those audits. This is where we pull in all of the areas that you can see here on our slide. So training to procedures, labeling and packaging, change management, design control matrices, kind of all of that fun. So this is where we get a little bit more into some documentation from our previous 2 slides. We start looking at the different regulations around labeling, because as many of us know, different countries require different symbols and different labeling requirements as well. We also need to do some package testing to make sure our products can get there as safely as we have built them, making sure they're going to do what they need to do once they arrive. Again, we're going to then look at some non-conforming materials since we have those suppliers. I'd like to say that we'll never have an issue pop up, but it can certainly happen. So looking at non-conforming materials, CAPA, and then also management responsibilities and kind of what their approvals and sign-offs need to be. Our fourth phase here is the release phase. I know some people are going to roll their eyes when I say this, but when going for the release phase, you will ultimately try your hardest to make sure things are as they should be. However, trying to strive for perfection, it's not something that's necessarily possible to have absolute perfection at the very beginning. There's always going to be room for improvement and change. So I would like to say that you will have thought of every way possible somebody is going to break your device, cause harm with your device, do something that they're not supposed to do. However, they can always find a way. You will be amazed once your product gets to market, somebody will find some way to do something with your device that you never even imagined of, never thought was possible. So this is why we need to have areas in place for this release phase for things like complaint handling and adverse event reporting and corrections and removals, customer feedback. Ultimately, we hope that we don't have to use these in a regular basis, but they do need to be something that we have in place to make sure we're open to that continuous change and improvement. So that once again ties back to the fact that risk can be an ever-living document, because as people come up with new ways to do things for your device, ultimately there will be new harms to include in your risk as well. So our last phase here is that track post-market phase. So once the product has been released, we want to strive to be proactive, but ultimately there will always be some reactive tasks that will have to be done as well, which is why we try and get ahead with things like internal auditing and monitoring effects, focusing on total life cycle of that risk management. You'll notice we've talked about risk in almost every phase of the SMART methodology as well. And then this also ties back to having that audit ready QMS, because if we're continuing to do things along the lines of that internal auditing, monitoring of your products and the effectiveness of your QMS, if you're continually doing that internally within your company, then ultimately when that high regulatory body comes in to do that audit, you're going to be in good shape because you've already identified potential fall areas that they would find and implemented some of those corrections as well. So truly a medical device QMS must leverage the best people, the processes, and also the technology as well. You want to make sure that all of these three areas are truly going to flow together. So now we look at the Audit Ready QMS best implementation practices as well. So the primary mission behind those are aligning with applicable regulations, describing those processes and practices within your company as well. So this goes back to making sure your QMS you're keeping it simple. So we want to make sure that those practices and policies that we've put in place, that our employees can follow them and clearly understand them to make sure that we have a fully compliant QMS system. So one of my absolute favorite sayings, any of my customers who I work with and talk with, I quote this on a daily basis. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. This is my favorite saying that I say for anything within the medical device. This is my favorite quote. So now we are going to dive into a little bit about a couple different options when it comes to a QMS system. So the first one is looking at a paper-based system, which a lot of new medical device companies, this is what they're most familiar with, and also some legacy products as well, that where we didn't necessarily have the means to do an electronic QMS. So storing documents on physical paper, examples including those Google Docs, Excel for design traceability matrix, I'm sure we've all worked with, looking at SharePoint, Dropbox. I know Teams now is becoming a popular option as well. So a paper-based system doesn't necessarily mean that it's just that stack of papers at the end of my desk separated into different folders. It can be kind of that combination of those stack of papers where you have physical signatures that people have signed, running around trying to find everybody to find their physical signatures. It's always a fun game to play, but also using those different kind of basic designs with Google Documents and SharePoint to help with some of those documentation. Our next big QMS that we tend to see here is a general purpose tool and legacy QMS software. So this can be looked at as navigating the QMS manually. So a paperless paper or a paper digital refer to storing scanned documents via online tools that act as digital filing cabinets. So kind of our third bullet point here, so it does not directly integrate with regulatory requirements. So these, once again, are just some generally built programs for storing your documents, but maybe don't have the exact workflows that you need for things like change management, or what happens when a CAPA comes into place, what workflow do I need to follow for that appropriate root cause analysis, investigation, verification, all those different common workflows that you need to have as part of 1345, and also the risk management side as well, as far as identifying those hazards and harms and kind of the whole fun workflow. So our next slide here is kind of looking at those different areas, or looking at the comparison of those three different options here. So the first is that legacy outdated. So document centric, physical, it's not digital paper solutions. So it can be, once again, that combination of that physical stack of papers, as well as using Google Drives or Teams. The next is kind of our getting by phase. So that is looking at those generally purpose-built product development and QMS tools. So ones where they might have some of those Part 11 compliant signatures, but aren't necessarily built directly for medical device companies, as in the type of regulations and workflows that they need to follow as part of ISO 1345 or even 14971 for risk. Our last one here is for the coming decade. So this is looking at specifically QMS softwares that are built directly for medical device companies. And so that would be, we can see here our Greenlight system. So it is going to take you through, it's easy to implement, it's validated out of the box, which is a big one. We talked about how much time and effort it can take to fully validate a system as well. Best part is that Greenlight is fully validated for you, as well as aligning to those specific standards and regulations. So having a risk system built to that 14971 workflow, as well as those different areas that you need to complete as part of quality events, like a CAPA or a non-conformance or an audit. So our next couple slides here is looking at comparing a paper-based system with the Greenlight system and an EQMS. So system scalability, one of our last rows down there at the bottom, keeping in mind what is happening over the last few years. So with COVID, we have seen an increase in remote work. As you can tell by my background, I am remote working from home. So I'm not necessarily in an area with a server that I can have direct access to. Rather, I can access it through online. And then looking at the potential as well for people across the country. So I know Greenlight specifically has grown to well over 10 different states within the United States, all the way from Boston and DC to Hawaii even. So having that accessibility from anybody in any country or state is huge as well. So this, we bring up some of the criterion around looking at design controls. So kind of that ad hoc Excel file that I know we've all worked with here, to having a more system built in that's going to automatically generate things like design history files for you and help you in staying in compliance with some of those documents that we know we need to create. So our next slide here is looking at kind of that more general purpose-built EQMS system. My biggest thing, once again, to point out when it comes to some of those general ones is the fact that they don't build around the processes and the workflows that we need as a medical device. And looking at, once again, those validation requirements around an EQMS and going through the amount of time and effort that can take a company, and looking at the availability if you are a small startup company. So next, I have just a fun couple of slides here to look at. So 50% of the FDA device surveillance inspections required formal action due to quality system failures. And then about 50% of medical device companies still use traditional paper or electronic document-based paperless systems to manage qualities. So coincidence? I will let you make that decision for yourself. So the next is looking at enabling that shift when it comes to the full lifecycle quality traceability. So kind of the three main areas when we're looking at a company is that quality side, our product side, and then also our executive management side when it comes to the entirety of the company. So previously, before, we've looked at the executives will have some input when it comes to the product will have specific inputs when it comes to quality, so forth, so on. They don't necessarily all integrate well together. And so with Greenlight, we are working at enabling that shift to having all three of those areas fully connected to each other at all times. So looking at things like having our complaint tracking in place, different training, document management, bringing all of those together to enable those constant management reviews, kind of what their roles and responsibilities are. There are specific requirements when it comes to ISO 13485 around specific management requirements within the actual company and the product as a whole. So we really want to make sure that quality standard when it comes to 1345 to our product, to our executive team, make sure everybody is in full connection with each other at all times. So just a quick slide here about market leading companies innovating with quality. So we have at the very bottom, our number one there is kind of the ad hoc. So saying that you don't have the ability to meet with our current or future market demands. So once again, keeping in mind that constant changing that we're seeing as well with switching to the EU MDR, switching to remote work, kind of all the different things that can be playing with that. We need to make sure that our actual processes and policies we have in place are going to be able to meet those ever-changing medical device needs here. So then going all the way up to number 5 there, we are looking at a market leader. So the ability to define markets, transform business models, and disrupt incumbents. So being really truly that market disruptor and having the best practices in place so we don't have the fear around audits, we don't have a stigma behind quality as just being paperwork, and making sure we're moving forward in the best manner possible. Perfect. So next year, we are looking at to increase visibility and control. Once again, that is bringing in that executive team into the entirety of the product, of the life cycle of that product, from the quality side, the product side, the executive side, bringing all of them together into one, reducing the unknowns and your risk. So once again, trying to bring in that risk as early on in our development phase as we possibly can to make sure we are eliminating some of those potentials when it comes to harms. And then having that truly risk-built QMS, and then also shifting from just compliance to true quality. So breaking those stigmas behind the word quality and risk and audits, and making sure we are more living those as part of our day-to-day so that we can truly produce true quality. So another quick slide here, a little bit about Greenlight is to invest in technology designed for your medical device industry. So things like built-in controls to specifically align you with 21 CFR 820 and ISO 1345-2016, as well as having the flexible review and approval workflows with Part 11 compliance. So once again, this is great for those potentially remote working situations where anyone can sign in at any time, sign those documents, be Part 11 compliant, and you don't have to play the fun game of running around an office trying to find people that I know I've certainly played in the past. And then also looking at fully integrating our risk. I won't harp on it too much more. I know I've talked about risk in just about every slide that we've gone through today, but risk is truly a hugely important part when it comes to our medical devices. Also having the ability to visualize the relationships between the QMS and the life cycle as well. So being able to visualize how the executive team is going to integrate with our products and our qualities, as well as how our different documents within the QMS themselves are actually connected. Our next one down there is the zero effort system validation. So once again, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times as well, but making sure that we have a validated system, whether that is something that you have the ability to support internally, or it's something that you're going to buy a more out-of-the-box system to save yourself that time and effort. And then also to drive collaboration. Pretty much any medical device company you talk with, collaboration is going to be one of your main keys. That is why we have a team. That is why we like to work together. More minds are always better than one. So we want to make sure we're driving that collaboration to bring in the best minds possible at all times to help us produce better medical devices, which is ultimately going to better the quality of people's lives. Perfect. And lastly, just a little bit about Greenlight here. So if you want to invest in a foundation that enables you to get devices to market faster with less risk, you can always request a free demo of our specifically built medical device EQMS at greenlightguru.com. So with that, Brian, I believe I have finished going through all of my slides here, and we are more than ready to go through a couple of questions.
Excellent. Great job, Laura. And I know you had to work through some distractions there, so that you did a great job. Thank you so much.
My apologies. Perks, like I said,
No,
working from home is when the dog just starts knocking things off from under you. So my apologies for the audio interruptions.
I thought I heard some tap dancing on that floor, so I commend you. Great job. Okay, we do have some questions lined up, and as I get to these, everybody, feel free to keep putting them in the chat, and we'll cover them where possible. There is just a quick procedural question. Are we going to be able to send the recording out to participants? Yes, we will. So that's an easy one. I can answer that. Here's a couple questions. Okay, first is, how ready do you think the US is for ISO 13485? Is it already used by manufacturers on the domestic market also? The FDA seems to be getting ready to embrace it, but it is not there yet.
That is a wonderful question. And that is one that I feel like I talk about constantly. So I do think the FDA is working more towards kind of that globalized harmonic standard of that 1345. We've certainly seen Canada switch more towards it as well. So it's not specifically stated, but you tend to be 1345 in Canada to be compliant. I do think it is something that the FDA will continue to embrace. As for right now, I don't know of any specific plans. Unfortunately, I'm not part of that regulatory body, so I don't get to know all the ins and outs that come along with it. But I do think that is a common shift that we are seeing. And I also think going 1345 compliant gets you very close to extremely close when it comes to being FDA compliant as well. There are a lot of commonalities between the two.
Excellent. Thank you for that question. Next question, how do you classify a service-based company in the regulatory world? for example, contract sterilizer?
So a lot of contract sterilizers that I have worked with in the past have gone to 1345 compliance. As far as what exactly you are sterilizing, that is more going to depend on the products that you are working with and who you are producing to as well. But when it comes to supplier management, I know a lot of companies are requiring that their suppliers be 1345 compliant, just because then they are going to know that you are implementing the correct policies and procedures and you are fully compliant when it comes to sterilizing their product as well. I do think you have to get a little bit more into the specifics as far as what exactly you're working towards or who you're working with to know what you will be classified as.
Great. Does Greenlight Guru pull in data from Excel?
So we do not pull in data directly from Excel. We have a couple things like our supplier management, where you can do an Excel file that will upload into the system as well. But our goal is to ultimately help you get away from those Excel files. So the system itself has a built-in design control matrix, a built-in risk matrix, to kind of help break away from some of those really fun Excel files that become very long and tedious and are very fun to format every once in a while, that I've certainly been a part of. So it does not directly integrate with Excel, but the goal is to help get you away from some of those Excel files.
Excellent. Okay, so any for you have, okay, here's another question here. When you mentioned best people, process, technology, what are some examples of technology to enhance a company's 13485 position?
Absolutely. So that is looking at things like an electronic QMS system. So having those built-in policies and procedures and having workflows in your QMS that are specifically aligned to those compliance and regulatory issues are going to help you when it comes to getting those compliance, because you're going to have the evidence when you get to that phase 1 and phase 2 audits. You'll have the evidence already built into your system to show that you are in compliance with 1345. So I think of when it comes to the Greenlight system, when it's looking at our quality events, you have the ability to set up direct automations for your different events that happen. So once again, if you set up those automations every time you have an XYZ CAPA get opened, then it's going to help you to maintain that you are following your policies and procedures. You're not going to miss one of your steps possibly as you're building out your CAPA as well. So having some of those features built into your eQMS is truly going to help you in maintaining that work towards the compliance of 1345 or whichever regulation you are going towards.
Thank you for that question. Here's another one here. Does Greenlight Guru offer a scaled version for smaller companies?
We do. So we have an essentials package, which is one of our smallest ones, which just looks at the document management side, as well as the design controls and risk management. That tends to be pretty commonly used with our small companies. And then you can expand as well into some of those post-market launches. So if you're still in that design and development phase and not quite ready for those post-market activities like customer feedback, complaint handling, those sorts of things, you can look at just the essentials package to get you started. And then as your company grows, we can grow with you as well.
Excellent. I think that actually goes through the questions we have. Last call, if you guys have more, here we go. I knew they would come out. Do you have solutions for interfacing with FDA databases or the UDAMED database in Europe? Maybe not on the level of integrations, but in the form of providing the information in a ready-to-use format for submission into such external systems?
So I can say personally, I have not had much experience when it comes to the direct integration into those systems as well. I have been a part of the team that has helped build out some of those packets of information as well. And I think the biggest thing is to just be as organized as you can when it comes to your documentation. So having things clearly labeled with what they are, version numbers, titles, things along those lines is going to be your best bet. If I get some more experience and have to do direct integration with one of those softwares, I will follow up and let you know how it goes.
Excellent. They keep coming here. This is great. So does Greenlight Guru integrate with ERP systems such as SAP, Oracle, etc.?
So right now, our biggest integration that we have directly is with more a Jira integration. So for software as a medical device development, as far as some other integrations coming down the road, if you do reach out to our demo team, they're going to be able to answer a couple more of those very specific questions for you as far as what integrations you're looking towards.
Great. When you talk about a validated software, do you provide an information packet to the company to integrate into their quality system?
So yes, we do. When it comes to our validation, it is, I always say, a very fun week around our office when we are getting ready to do a new release that requires new OQs and PQs and involves a lot of us sitting at our computer, taking screenshots, making sure our validations are good. There are, I believe, about 13 different OQs and PQs that we complete that we then provide to you as well, along with written out memos as far as what has been updated that you will put into your system as well. And then from there, when it comes to a customer responsibility side, we obviously want you to review some of those OQs and PQs because you never want to just blindly accept anyone's word, making sure you agree with everything that has been written. But then there is a quick 20-minute installation qualification that needs to be completed once. But once you have that done, you are considered a validated system and move forward.
Great, Laura, you've answered these questions rapid fire and really well. You've done a terrific job. Thanks so much for your time today and for your sharing of this really critical information. As you can see, you can reach Laura here if you have any sort of individual follow-up questions. But I'm going to say that I think you've done a fine job of answering every question that we had come up. And I just want to thank you for your time and your efforts and your energy. And I want to thank Greenlight Guru for their support of MassMEDIC and for always working with us to help bring these great educational programs to our members. I am going to end the recording and wish you all a great day. Thank you on behalf of MassMEDIC. My name is Brian Johnson, and we'll see you again at our next virtual program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.